How do you follow? How do you follow all that? It's lovely to be here. It's lovely to see you. And it's nice that we've already had some humming contributions, because we're going to have some more contributions now, because I'd like to start off with a little quiz. And if you feel that you would like to shout out some answers through your masks, then do feel free to do so. So here's the very first group of words I'd like us to have a look at. Banana, apple, grapefruit. Vinegar, cabbage, charcoal, and cotton wool. Can you think of anything that links these words together? Could well be. They could. It's an excellent response. Excellent response. Do we have any other takers? Pardon? He certainly did. He certainly did. Do we have anything else? No? Well, you may be astonished to hear that there are all kinds of diets. I know. You know, banana, apple, grapefruit, vinegar, well, it's apple cider vinegar, cabbage, ooh, tricky one. Charcoal, wouldn't be very thrilling for me, I'm afraid. Cotton wool. I have never heard of a cotton wool diet. Cotton wool, apparently, it's a very extreme one, cotton wool soaked with juice, but it's dangerously lethal. So all I can really say is, don't try any of those at home. Here's the next group of words. Crunch, jumping jack, lunge, plank, and squat. Excellent. That's an easy one, isn't it? They're all different kinds of exercises. Okay, here we go. Final group of words. Touring, road, mountain, electric, folding, trail, and track. Excellent. Yes, they're all bikes. They're all bikes. So we have diets, exercises, and bikes. Can you think of anything which would link these words together now at this particular time? Lockdown. You're on the ball today. You're on the ball, Dawn. Thank you so much. Yes, lockdown. Because of these restrictions, people haven't been able to do as much as perhaps they would normally do. And we now have government recommendations and TV programs. Have you seen them? How to lose a stone in 21 days. And, there's all sorts of stuff on the telly. And they are attempting to bring us into better health and fitness. Well, this morning I'd like to choose just one aspect of these, something I'm sure we all enjoy, food. So what is it that gets your taste buds going? Do you have a preference for savoury or sweet? For Marmite or marmalade? Well, I have to admit, for me, I have no hesitation in choosing a preference for sweet. And if I really had to narrow it down, it would be chocolate. I was tempted to do a picture and just put it on a slide, but no, because it's got to be eaten at some point, and that would suit me absolutely fine. Chocolate. It suits every circumstance. If I'm tired, chocolate gives me energy. If I need to concentrate, it gives me focus. If I'm feeling down, chocolate lifts me up. If I'm trying to switch off, it helps me to relax. Chocolate works for me every time. It's almost medicinal. However, like all food choices, we need to be able to try to aim for balance. So, my title today is You Are What You Eat. Now, which of these appeals the most to you? Which would you say is the most delicious? Would that grab you? Okay. How about that? Yep, okay. Some very healthy people around, yes. Yeah. Maybe it's a bit of both, but it's purely personal preference. There's no right or wrong answer. But the notion is, to be fit and healthy, you need to eat good food. And it's not a new idea. It's been around for a very long time. So what has all this got to do with the Bible? Well, we'll be looking at the book of Daniel to find out. Daniel, that well-known book in the Old Testament. And we're going to concentrate on chapter 1 and look at an eating story today. The words will be coming up on the screen, and they are from all different versions as well. But afterwards as well, I'll be highlighting 4 main points. So let's start with chapter 1 and verse 1 and 2. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God. In other words, one country was invading another country. Babylon invaded Judah, at the end of which many people from Judah were taken to be slaves in Babylon. And the next 3 verses, from verse 3, they tell us what happened to the captives, the Israelites, next. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility, young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years, and after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So, some of the people who were taken away to be slaves were from the royal family and from nobility, and they were now prisoners of war. And Daniel and his 3 friends were among those who were now chosen to be given 3 years of special training. They had basically fitted all the criteria. They were bright, they were intelligent, they were capable and handsome. So they ticked all the boxes. So if we now go on to verse 7, we'll find out another change that was in store for them. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar, Hananiah was called Shadrach, Mishael was called Meshach, and Azariah was called Abednego. So, to recap briefly, Daniel's life has been completely changed. The land he grew up in has been destroyed. He's been torn from his family, his friends, his home, all that he knew. He's been taken as a captive and forced to live in a foreign land which has no fear of God and which worships many different gods and idols. He will have 3 years of studying a different language, culture, and belief system. He will be eating the same food as that served at the royal court, and his name has already been changed to a Babylonian name. Each of these factors on their own could have brought a challenge for Daniel, but there was one that caused him and his 3 friends the biggest problem, big enough for Daniel to speak out. And we find it in the next verse. But Daniel determined that he would not defile himself by eating the king's food or drinking his wine. So he asked the head of the palace staff to exempt him from the royal diet. We don't know the exact reason why the food was considered to be defiling. It may have been because it included meat from forbidden animals. In Old Testament times, there were very strict laws governing what could and couldn't be eaten. Or it may have been that the food and wine had been dedicated to idols. We don't know, but whatever reason it was a very brave thing to do, to question the king's officials. And the next verse, we're on to verse 9, tells us how the official responded. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, "I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you." The official's fear of the king was very well founded. Losing your head was not uncommon in those days. But Daniel was not about to give up. His next step was to appeal to the steward, who was a lower official. But he had direct charge of the young men and their diet. And we'll see what happened next. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, "Please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see." So he agreed to this and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. So at the end of the test, their request was granted. Their vegetable and water diet continued. During their training period, God's grace was upon them. And at the end of the 3 years, Daniel and his friends had a personal interview with the king. And the following verses tell us the outcome, starting at 17. "To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom." Well, it sounds like a total success story, but we do need to remember what's happened to Daniel. He went from a life of comfort and ease to losing everything and everyone, to witnessing death and destruction surrounding him, and to becoming a slave. He was a teenager when it happened. It must have been terrifying. He had a choice about how he would deal with it all, to lie down and give up, or to stay standing. And here's my first point. Face your fears. They may look mountainous. They may look impenetrable. But Daniel faced his fears, and they looked the same. But he didn't just give up. He didn't allow his fear of all the unknown situations to paralyze him. He faced them instead. And how was he able to do that? Well, the biggest factor was that he had complete confidence that God was with him. He knew he was not alone. Despite all that had happened, he didn't give up on his situation, on himself, or on God. He strengthened himself by having total faith that God was with him. He knew that in the best and worst of circumstances, God never left him. And because of that, he could face his fears. So how about you and I? How do we manage when we have to face something new, something unknown, something scary? Well, several years ago, a writer named Susan Jeffers wrote a book with the title, "Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway." And she suggested several fear truths, and I've adapted a couple of them here. So here's fear truth number 1. The fear will never go away as long as you continue to grow. Every time you take a step into the unknown, into something new, you will experience fear. And there's no point saying, well, when I feel better about it, or when I'm not quite so afraid, then I'll do it. You'll be waiting a very long time. It would be one of those when-then situations. Well, when this happens, then I'll do that. Or to put it another way, it's a bit like an equation. When plus then equals potentially never. Here's fear truth number 2. The only way to get rid of the fear of doing something is to do it. The more you do it, the less afraid you will be. Until one day you'll realize that you've faced the unknown and handled it. Just as you begin to feel comfortable again, guess what? Another challenge shows up. And now you have another choice to make. You can sense that familiar feeling in the pit of your stomach and think, nope, not again, and turn away. Or you can feel the fear and do it anyway. The crucial factor is remembering that we're never on our own. God is with us. It's remembering all that he has already done for us. And when panic threatens to overwhelm us, we have to stop and keep breathing and remember. God was by Daniel's side all of his life, through the good times and the challenges, and he'll be by our side too. Well, you may feel that your fear is relatively insignificant compared to what others may be facing, but its size makes no difference at all. It's all relative. The feeling it evokes is the same. God doesn't just show up in the mountainous times of fear. He knows what's huge to you, and he'll stand and walk beside you. He wants you to continue to grow throughout your life. Not beginning at a certain age or ending at a certain age. There are no limits to God. There are no best before dates in God's agenda. And throughout your life, he will stand, walk, or carry you through. The day you turn away from facing your fears will be the day you stop growing. And if you stop growing, you'll stop moving. If you stop moving, you'll stagnate and you'll just give up. God's plans for you in all and every circumstance are far, far bigger than you could ever dream. Just reach out your hand and he will take hold of it. Let's just have a quick look at 1 John chapter 4, verse 18. There's no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. So who are you? Are you going to remain fearful and stay static? Are you going to feed on all your fearful feelings? Remember, you are what you eat. Try a different menu. Take a risk. Face the fear. Here's my second point. Your frustrating places have a purpose. Daniel was now a second-class citizen in a foreign country, but he wasn't there by accident. He was there by divine appointment for a divine reason. Daniel was aware that King Nebuchadnezzar was incredibly powerful, successful, and dominating. He knew that the Babylonian Empire was strong, secure, powerful, but he also knew that God was bigger than all of them. And therefore, whatever position he was placed in, God would always ultimately be the one who was in control. So where are you positioned? Where's God placed you? God sometimes puts us in extraordinary places. They can be unexpected and even unwanted. From our perspective, they can be the opposite to our desires, but God has us there for a reason. And what to us seems like a huge, impossible situation is a tiny fragment of the jigsaw of the plans that he has. It's how we deal with it that it's the crucial part. How did Daniel deal with it? He was a slave, but he studied diligently, he worked hard, he always gave his best because he knew that overriding everything, whatever he did for God. So are you working somewhere you'd rather not be? Do you dread Monday mornings? Are you praying for God to get you out of there? Or maybe it's the location where you live. Are you itching to move out? Maybe it's your school, your college or university. Is it less than you'd hoped for? Or maybe it's closer to home. Maybe it is home. Perhaps it's a family challenge. These can all be such hard places to be in. And when you feel like you've had enough, and you're screaming inside to be released, just stop and breathe and think, why are you there? Are you the only one in that place who believes? Well, that's why you're there. Are you the only light in a dark place? Then that's why you're there. And who's there for you? God is. God didn't take away Daniel's circumstances, and he may not take away yours, but he gave him the grace that he needed to go through it. And that's exactly what he gives you. Grace is God's unmerited favor. We can't earn it. He gives it to us freely. It strengthens us. It protects us. In a hostile environment, our instinct may be to veer towards resentment, fear, criticism, anger. But think of Daniel. Whatever his circumstances, he remembered everything he was doing for God. God was bigger than King Nebuchadnezzar. He was bigger than the Babylonian Empire. And God is bigger than your work colleagues. He's bigger than your boss or your line manager. And he's bigger than the biggest bully. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Let's just take a look at it. I've used the Message version for this. So here's what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life, your sleeping, eating, going to work and walking around life, and place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. So what are you feeding on? Are you feeding on frustration, resentment, anger? Well, you are what you eat. Maybe a change of diet is needed. Instead of making a meal out of moaning and criticism, be ruthless. Scrape it away. It's not good for you. My third point is, choose your battles wisely and battle wisely. Daniel didn't waste time or energy challenging things that he knew were ultimately of little or no importance. He had a very clear belief of who he was. He knew he was a child of God. And as we read at the beginning, one of the consequences of his life of slavery was that he had to have a change of name. He used to be called Daniel, now he was called Belteshazzar. But because he knew who he was, having his name changed from a Hebrew name into a Babylonian name wasn't of huge consequence to him. His identity wasn't threatened because he knew his most important identity as a child of God was secure, and that could never be changed. His 3 years of training would have included, among other things, a thorough study of the religious practices of the Babylonians. But this was of no great concern to Daniel because he knew that God's grace would give him the knowledge and discernment to distinguish wisely the true from the false. But as we've seen, God had a food issue. The prospect of 3 years of fine dining was a step too far and caused him to challenge the rules that had been laid down by the king. It was a huge risk, but on this subject, Daniel was unwilling to compromise. His faith and beliefs determined his actions. But how Daniel approached this was very considered and very wise. Did he fling his food on the floor in demonstration of his anger? No. Did he secretly scrape it beneath the nearest palm tree and water its roots with the wine? No. Daniel was not confrontational. But in order to achieve the desired result, he needed to approach this dilemma carefully. He knew what outcome he wanted, so he started with the end result in mind. He respected the authority of his captors, but clearly explained his situation, and very importantly, he provided a solution to the problem. And the solution was a simple but concise test. He suggested what food and drink could be given to himself and his 3 friends, the length of time for the test, how the result could be measured, and then suggested that the final decision would, of course, be the palace stewards. In other words, vegetables and water for 10 days, at the end of which, compare the 4 of them to the other young men who'd been eating royal food, and if the steward decided they looked healthy, their chosen diet could be accepted. And we already know it was a success. If you recall, the king had ordered that they eat the finest food, but Daniel knew that to do that would be to defile himself. So what did Daniel do? He gave a problem and offered a solution at the same time. I wonder how often we do that. I wonder if we tend to lean heavily on only talking about the problem. I wonder how many problems could be resolved much more speedily by thinking them through, not just speaking on impulse, but by strategic thinking. We'll have a quick look at Proverbs 24. Again, this is in the Message version. It's better to be wise than strong. Intelligence outranks muscle every day, any day. Strategic planning is the key to warfare. To win, you need a lot of good counsel. Well, Daniel knew what diet he preferred. For him, eating simple food not only gave him physical good health, but clarity of thinking. And Daniel understood the principle of you are what you eat. So my fourth and final point is this. You're not an island. I've taken this phrase from a quotation by a 17th century writer called John Donne. Donne was a Christian, and this phrase is found in one of his sermons. No man is an island entire of itself. What he's saying is that human beings do not thrive when isolated from others. That's familiar in these recent days, isn't it? No one is self-sufficient. Everyone relies on others around them. Stephen Covey, an author writing today, echoes that idea. He writes that everyone goes through 3 stages of maturity: dependence, independence, and interdependence. When we're very young, we're dependent on parents, on adults. As we grow up, we become independent, relying on ourselves. But the highest level of maturity is interdependence. Sometimes we think, well, we've reached the stage of independence, that's the best place to stay. But it isn't. We're social beings. And in order to thrive, we need other people. Stephen Covey writes, interdependence is a far more mature, more advanced concept. If I am physically interdependent, I am self-reliant and capable, but I also realize that you and I working together can accomplish far more than even at my best I could accomplish alone. If I am emotionally interdependent, I derive a great sense of worth within myself, but I also recognize the need for love, for giving, and for receiving love from others. If I am intellectually interdependent, I realize that I need the best thinking of other people to join with my own. Daniel understood this. Throughout the book of Daniel, he and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, supported each other, worked together, ate together, and prayed together. The more they did this, the more they achieved, interdependently. In the book of Hebrews, it says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." Daniel and his friends fed on each other's qualities, strengths, and gifts. All of them understood you are what you eat. So let's return to the beginning. What are you feeding on? It's time to remember. Face your fears. Know that your frustrating places have a purpose. Choose your battles wisely and battle wisely. And remember, you're not an island. Are you allowing fear to dominate your life, to restrict and control you? Is it preventing you from being the brave, unstoppable person that God wants you to be? Well, fear that crushes is not from God, so stop feeding on it. You're having a hard time being in the place where God has positioned you. You're there for a purpose, for God's purpose. Whatever you're dealing with every day, God is bigger than it all. Frustration, resentment, inadequacy are not from God. Stop feeding on them. Are you wise in choosing the battles that you know are worth fighting for? Being paralyzed by problems is not from God. Stop feeding on them. Are you living on an island, striving to solve and accomplish everything on your own, independently? Being isolated is not from God. Stop feeding on it. God's desire is that you achieve all He's planned for you. To do that, you need to ruthlessly cut out everything that affects your health and well-being. You are what you eat. So let's just end in prayer. Father, you already know our fears. Embolden us to face them. Whatever uncomfortable places you've positioned us in, help us to trust you. Give us wisdom in choosing which battles to fight and how to fight them. And guide us out of isolation and into the strength of a group. Amen.